So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for CQ Advocacy's latest webinar, Leveraging Advocacy for Donations and Social Media and Beyond. Delighted you could join us today. I am Anne Dermody. I'm the Content Marketing Director here at CQ for Advocacy and Government Relations, and I'm also the editor of Connectivity, which is our free resource for nonprofits, associations, and advocacy professionals, and I would encourage you to check that out. And I'm joined here today by Megan McCoskey, and Megan is the Advocacy Product Manager for CQ, and she works closely with nonprofits, trade associations, and corporate clients to help them leverage tools to make the most of their advocacy platforms. So if you have any questions, you can add them in the chat box. And we will go through the agenda briefly, why it's a great time for advocacy and, of course, because of that, for donations, why you should do it, how you should do it, what to do when your issue isn't hot or the chatter isn't about you. We'll talk a little about Giving Tuesday and social donations, and then Megan will tell us one thing you can implement today to see those donations hopefully skyrocket on social, so definitely worth sticking around for that. We also have some bonus material we're going to send you after the presentation. We'll send you a link to this webinar where you can view the recording kind of in your own time again. And we'll also send you this white paper we created a little while ago called 10 Advocacy Tactics to Implement This Week to Boost Your Fundraising. And in that you'll kind of learn a little more about how to use peer-to-peer fundraising to your advantage, how to combine advocacy alerts with fundraising solicitations, how to share results with your donors, and how to frame a donation as an advocacy action, and there's lots more in there too. So keep an eye out for that email afterwards. Okay, so I think Megan and I have both been noticing that kind of at the beginning of the year an unprecedented amount of advocacy going on in the back end of our tools, CQ Engage and CQ Ignite. And of course that wasn't surprising, you know, unless you've been asleep under a rock for the past year, you'll know that there's been more than a little bit of a boost in advocacy efforts across the board. And for some organizations, while it's been a very intense time in terms of their issues being in the spotlight, there has been this bright light of unexpected, in some cases, donations and very lucrative donations. And just to give you an idea, one example is the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, who've been around for 100 years, more than 100 years now. They ended up receiving $15 million in the weeks following the election last year. And when that first kind of White House executive order on immigration, the travel ban, came down, that weekend alone they received another $24 million in online donations from 356,000 plus people. And that alone was more than 6 times their annual online donations, sort of in a regular year, if you like. And by mid-February, they'd pushed that number up to $80 million in donations. So huge numbers, and they weren't the only ones, obviously, who had who saw this big spike in donations. Planned Parenthood received 40 times their usual number of donations after the election, and the IRC, they also saw a huge spike in donations. And then a little later in the year, with the whole Paris Agreement, being, you know, the U.S. coming out of the Paris Agreement, environmental organizations saw big increases in their donations. So, you know, you have all these groups benefiting from what's sort of maybe happening at a legislative or executive level, but what it really brings home, I think, to us is that people are moved by the issues, and not just to take action in the form of emailing or signing petitions or tweeting, but to make a physical donation as well. You know, they want to show their issue or their support for an issue in a monetary way. And that really is the sweet spot where advocacy and fundraising meet. And you know, a big thing to remember is that there'll be many years and months where your supporters are maybe kind of blasé about you, but so because of that, you want to kind of really zone in on this big opportunity when it comes and not miss it. And it's not just groups sort of that feel like they're being targeted that are benefiting. You know, when people read about one side of the aisle being fired up, it's easy to forget that that also gets the opposing side fired up, and that makes them more likely to get engaged and donate. So you need to leverage that momentum, regardless of which side of the aisle or the issue you're on. Now is a really great time to leverage advocacy for donations. So why do advocacy in relation to fundraising? You know, I'm sure we have some people on here whose main job is advocacy, or government relations, and having to think about fundraising, which may not be your main revenue stream, seems like an extra job you don't have time for. And equally, we probably have some folks listening who are mostly concerned with fundraising, who are wondering, where they'll get the energy or the resources to do advocacy. But the truth is, if you're an organization that relies on donations, you probably shouldn't be thinking of them as mutually exclusive. Whether you're in advocacy, grassroots, or membership, or fundraising, you know that you've constantly to be replenishing your list in order to grow. You can't keep asking the same people for the same donations or the same people to take action all the time without kind of wearing them out. So that's a given. But there are hard and fast numbers to support why advocacy and fundraising go hand in hand, and I've just pulled a couple of them here today. The first one is that donors are 7 times more likely to give when your ask is connected to an advocacy initiative. And that kind of speaks for itself, right? An advocacy ask, it gives you that better in. From there you can build a relationship that ultimately turns those advocates into donors if they don't do so straight away. And according to a Marketing and Research Institute study, advocacy emails had a 6 times better click-through rate on average across all types of nonprofits. And for certain nonprofits, like those dealing with human rights or animal welfare or environmental causes, that open rate was even better, that click-through rate. It was 7 times more likely to be opened if it was an advocacy-related email than if it was a fundraising-related email. And so, again, that's an important point. And then finally, you want to work that 0 moment of truth. And so the 0 moment of truth is something we refer to in sales and marketing, and it's really just that moment in the buying process when the consumer researches a product before they buy it. And you could say, that people reading about, say, the travel ban who were moved to donate to the ACLU, they were having that 0 moment of truth. And that's when you really want to capture people, at that moment when they're feeling passionate, and you need to make things as easy as possible for them to donate or take action for you, preferably both, obviously. But and Megan will talk kind of a little more about that later, about how you do that. So advocacy and fundraising are similar in that there's a call to action or an ask in the email or the outreach, but obviously it's a lot easier to ask someone to kind of fill in their details and sign a petition, leave a comment, than it is to kind of flatly ask them to, give you some money, basically. But when you combine the two, it makes both much more effective. And so that's also true when you want to get the people who've taken action for you to spread the word. It's much easier for small donors and supporters to share and ask their friends to take action than it is necessarily for them to ask, friends and family members to donate to something. And we've already said people who are willing to take action for you are much more willing to donate to you, because they've already declared that interest in your issues and in going to bat for you. Engagement drives donor retention, and membership organizations obviously already know this, and they make a real effort to keep their folks activated throughout the year as a retention tool. And, the good ones will do it hand in hand with their government relations or advocacy departments. And then finally, it builds your audience, and often worldwide, to kind of groups who maybe have never heard of you before. And there's a good example of the Trevor Project, which is a nonprofit that offers suicide prevention services to young LGBTQ people. And they were running $200,000 behind in their donations before coming up to the end of the year, before the last election. And in the week after the election, they received more than $165,000 from 20 donors, or from many donors, rather, in 20 different countries. So this was real exposure for them. You'd all these people who had never heard of them now donating to them, and maybe even more importantly, they signed up 1,000 new supporters to donate on a monthly basis. And of course, if you're an organization that relies on donations, you know that that's kind of a golden ticket. So how do I do it? How do you turn that big news, maybe that's coming out of DC or at a state or local level, that affects your cause into a driver for upping your funds? Well, that old mantra, failure to prepare, prepare to fail, is really true here. And you really need to be ready. There's no point in scrambling as soon as something breaks, because there just won't be time. And there's generally a warning, not that much really goes through Congress or at a state or local level without you getting kind of some sort of notion of it about to happen. And so the important thing is that you're not kind of hustling to get the big picture stuff in place when something breaks. All you should be doing at that point is, crafting your language or your message. So your system really should be primed and ready to go. And what you really need, obviously, to have in place is an advocacy platform like CQ Engage or CQ Ignite. That's going to be your nerve center where supporters can come and get educated on the issue and take action on your behalf. And, what do we mean by action? Well, at a minimum, they should be able to send a letter or email to Congress, sign a petition, maybe make a phone call, comment on a regulation if that's where your problem lies, register to vote, and then, of course, obviously, they should be able to donate and do that easily. And they really have to be able to do that with sort of minimum fuss and effort from their perspective and from their phone, or on their social media platform, because that's likely where they're going to see your call to action these days, or where they're going to read about the issues that are affecting you. Now, you also need a way, obviously, of emailing those supporters to tell them to take action, so that you can capture their information and work on building your email list too, and that you can target them kind of further down the line if you need them to take action again or need them to donate. And your Advocacy Action Center doesn't have to be super robust or to do lots of complicated things if you're just getting started, or, if you need to react to something really fast and you need to get something in place. Particularly for smaller nonprofits who maybe don't have a big budget for advocacy, something like CQ Ignite is great because it doesn't take you a long time to set up and get running. You can turn it around in kind of less than an hour, and it'll look good to your supporters and kind of give you minimum hassle to kind of have a professional-looking Advocacy Action Center ready to go. So, okay, now you've got your apparatus in place, so you need a hook to drive those donations for your advocacy. And sometimes it's something very obvious, and you don't need to do much more than put a donate button up there on your Advocacy Action Center or on your social media post. And again, Megan will talk about just how easy that is to do in a few minutes. But you sometimes can really help things to escalate your donations. And the trick is to kind of figure out what motivates people to take action. What is it that makes them write to their lawmakers or to donate? Well, we did a piece last year on CQ connectivity where we compiled a list of the best grassroots and advocacy marketing campaigns, and we whittled it down to 50 contenders. And based on how successful the campaign was in terms of response rates or donations or whatever the end goal was for the organization that was running the campaign. And the things that we identified as coming up again and again in successful campaigns was this notion of emotional engagement, right? And that can mean many things to many different people. So it doesn't always mean tears or laughter, but, it can be fear or, even rage. Could be a perceived lack of justice or a sense of kind of losing ground or whatever it is, doesn't really matter. But to really get a campaign fired up and to get people inspired to take action and donate, you need that. You need to trigger that emotional kind of passion in people. And it could be something as simple as a piece of legislation going through at local or national level that might have a detrimental effect on your supporters' position, but or it could also be piggybacking off of something else that's going on. And I pulled a couple of interesting examples here from that piggybacking kind of notion, that where in both of these cases it wasn't necessarily the organization and what they did, but it was what others did on their behalf that worked as the hook. And so it's kind of interesting that Planned Parenthood got $82,000 in donations in Mike Pence's name and in 1 month, and Cal Penn, the actor and producer, was moved to donate because of what he saw was a racist tweet, and he then channeled that into asking others to donate kind of alongside him up to, he had set a goal of $2,500. Well, that one tweet and goal turned into $800,000 plus for the IRC. So again, not something that the organizations themselves necessarily drove, but worked out well for them. And I think nonprofits are often kind of low on funds but high on creativity, so you can definitely use that and channel it, and by seeing what people are saying on social media that relates to you or your advocacy position, and you can kind of work things in that way. And then finally, you need to kind of appeal to what I call the narcissistic altruist. and we all have kind of a slight narcissistic side, and this has sort of never been truer than with what's going on kind of on social media. And it's back to that piece I mentioned earlier. The other big thing, kind of besides an emotional driver, was when people can appear as the kind of star of the show in a way that doesn't seem too braggadocious, it works very well. So, you know, if you don't know what I mean, I'm just going to leave you with 3 words: ice bucket challenge, and that kind of gives you a good idea of how putting yourself in the center of the donation and in the kind of the star of the show can work really well. And we will talk actually a little about the ice bucket challenge in a while. Okay, so what if the issue isn't about me? Well, you can still make it about me, right? If you're an organization, say, who agrees with an issue or a topic that's come up, your supporters expect to hear from you too. You know, they're also watching very closely at that moment, and for them, it's also a zero moment of truth. It's something that you really have to capitalize on. And just an example here is the Californians for Population Stabilization. They also saw a spike in their fundraising for kind of opposing reasons back at the beginning of the year, and they capitalized by running TV ads against certain senators and emailing their list and encouraging them to donate, and, you know, generally giving their supporters something to do that kept them interested and engaged and let them know that they were monitoring the situation for them. So you don't really have an excuse, that you can always kind of spin things to make it more about you than it necessarily appears at first. So there's other great reasons to combine advocacy and fundraising. Number one, it boosts your donor and potential donor list, obviously, and helps to expand your membership if you're a membership organization. And we sort of touched on this earlier, but if you're trying to build your donor list, you need to do it through constantly getting these new supporters and expanding your audience. And that can be challenging. So advocacy is a great way to do it in relation to something big that's breaking, because it gets you in front of people who would likely never have heard of your organization. And, you know, to go back to the ACLU again, not only did they see their donations skyrocket from advocacy, but they also doubled their membership to 1.2 million, and that's just huge. You know, they now have this army effectively who likely never thought about joining them before, that are kind of ready to take action and you know, email on their behalf kind of at a moment's notice. So it also increases retention. Engaged donors retain, and again, membership organizations are probably particularly conscious of this. That Marketing General report that I mentioned earlier, they found that 33% of members don't retain because of a lack of engagement, and of course that's the same for donors. So the very act of them donating is one you can kind of chalk up to an engagement during the year, and it means they're kind of out there and they're listening to you. It also gives supporters and donors something to do, and this kind of ties to the one above, but your supporters really do want to do something, and very often all that's available to them is, you know, to send money, which is probably not something they're going to do all the time, but most of us don't have time to go out and volunteer or actually kind of physically support your cause in a way other than a monetary one. So taking action for you or sending a donation makes us feel good, basically, and like we've contributed in a meaningful way. Advocacy also gives you another reason to reach out other than asking for kind of hard dollars, and also, you know, by the same token, asking for a donation gives you a way to reach out if you're only ever doing advocacy. So it's a great way to kind of tie the two together. It can help to establish you as the go-to thought leader, you know, the one who gets things done in the space. And if you're seen as the organization in the know, that just kind of helps with everything. It helps with your retention, with your growth, with your whole kind of audience awareness, and ultimately then with your donations. And finally then, having an advocacy tool lets your supporters know about other fundraising events, about volunteer opportunities, and kind of what's happening on the issues that concern them. Okay, so we're going to talk briefly about Giving Tuesday. And Giving Tuesday, of course, is this global day of giving that's been kind of fueled by social media, and I think it's going into its 6th year now. and it's always celebrated on the Tuesday following Thanksgiving in the U.S., and that's just after Black Friday and Cyber Monday. And it's really become this kind of beacon, at least on social media, to kick off the kind of charitable season and the holiday and the end-of-year giving. It's on the 28th of November this year. And it's a great excuse to launch a fundraising or an awareness campaign, especially if you haven't done one before, or even if you have, to kind of help boost that end-of-year campaign. So a couple of ideas to keep in mind if you're starting to launch a campaign this season that will hopefully help escalate your donations are, the first one I would say is to ask for matching grants. Maybe you've got a big supporter who's willing to do that. It's been shown that people are more likely to give if they think their donation will be matched, and of course that's a win-win for you. And then if you have a platform like CQ Engage, you can share your story on there, and you can really educate your supporters, and also, of course, on social media. Set a theme. This is kind of becoming more and more popular. A lot of organizations now are kind of piggybacking on that hashtag Giving Tuesday and making up their own versions, such as Giving Zoo Day or Giving Shoes Day. And that just kind of, makes it more interesting and more dialed into your particular organization. Set a goal. It's important to set a goal because people feel like they're contributing toward or striving toward something, and it could be a monetary goal, but could also be the number of donations that you're hoping to receive. If you do set a goal, make sure that you keep people informed as to kind of where you're at with that goal, because that builds momentum and a sense of urgency, and it gives you a real reason to kind of continue to remind them about your campaign and to encourage them to donate. Don't wait until November 28th or November 27th to reach out to your supporters and your members or fans or advocates, because you're kind of losing momentum then. I would reach out way before. Some people will donate on the spot. Some people will wait until Giving Tuesday, but make sure you kind of keep them in the know beforehand. And then another idea to kind of give yourself the best chance of making that goal is to boost your Facebook posts. Pay to boost them so that you stand out on a busy day. It's kind of a pay-to-play idea, but really for very little money you can pay to boost your Facebook post among the right audience, and so that's always a good idea to do too. Okay, I said we were going to talk about the biggest donation drive ever on social media, and I think everyone at this point knows that it's the 2014 Ice Bucket Challenge. It was, it had 17 million uploads to Facebook, 440 million people watched, which accounted for 10 billion views, which is just phenomenal. And they raised, $115 million in donations. Again, phenomenal, a huge success. And the ALS, whose fundraiser this was, uses CQ Engage. But what if you looked at this a different way? So obviously not to take anything from this hugely successful mission, what if you thought about how it could possibly have been even more successful by doing one small thing? Well, Megan is going to tell us a little bit about that, but these are things to kind of keep in mind. When people posted their videos, or when you looked at a friend's video, donating wasn't something that was instant. It wasn't something you could do straight away. You were sent to a third-party site to make your donation. And if you wanted to make more than one donation, and that was the case in a lot of situations because so many people were posting videos, you had to input your information and your payment information every time. So there were multiple links and forms and fields. And while $150 million obviously is enormous, that was just a 2% conversion. So if you could imagine a 4% conversion, which is still really modest, would have resulted in $230 million for the ALS. So keep that in mind as I hand you over now to Megan, who's going to show us one simple way that you could potentially double those donations.
Thank you, Anne. So first we're going to talk about meeting people where they are. So as she mentioned with the Ice Bucket Challenge, well, hugely successful. if people wanted to follow through on their commitment to make a donation and not just have their friends like their posts on social media, they needed to move on to a third-party fundraising page. They needed to follow through, and they also didn't get that public gratification that they were getting from posting their video. And so within Engage and Ignite, we have a tool that allows you to add an app to your Facebook and your Twitter accounts to process donations actually on social media. And what that means is that you can add the app to your account, and any of your supporters or yourself can add a mention of your account, the hashtag donate, and a dollar amount. If they are already, if they've done this with any other client or any other company, they will process their donations immediately on social media with a thank you from your account. It looks like they're interacting with you. And it also helps amplify what a great thing they're doing. And if they haven't yet, they'll be walked through the steps of creating an account also right there on social media. So it's a great way to really amplify these donations, capitalize on the things that people are talking about and getting them to really put their money where their mouth is, and then also keeps donors from losing focus just by keeping them in the same place without having them leave the platform that they're on or the app that they're on. Now, when we talk about Twitter and CQ Engage or CQ Ignite, it's a great way to get your followers involved, not just with donations, but also in having them contact their elected officials. And this is really valuable, especially on Twitter, because 100% of the House and Senate is on Twitter, which means that your supporters can reach them there. It's also, with Engage, you can connect people with elected officials at the state level as well. And so in doing that, you are able to give them pre-populated messages, help them stay on message and deliver the message in the right way. And also, we will match them with their elected officials. And so I come in, I enter my information, where I live, and it's going to connect me with the elected official that represents me, give me a pre-populated message so I can easily take action. And then all of that information that I've entered is now in your database. So you have an address for me, you have my name, my email address, and you're able to reach out to me in the future and continually ask me to take action or convert me to a donor. Now, there are a lot of ways you can increase impact on Twitter. Some of the things that have been shown to help really make a great Twitter outreach is having your advocates identify themselves as constituents or members of your group. It's also great to target your tweets. And so if you are an Engage user, you can create different Twitter messages based on people's committee assignments or their vote histories or even just a list of people that you like. And it provides a variety of messages, makes them more personal for these elected officials. And then this is from a Congressional Management Foundation study from a couple of years ago, but they found that at the federal level, as few as 10 tweets is enough to get attention from a lawmaker, which anyone who's been doing digital advocacy and sending emails for a while knows that that's a really low number to get attention, which is a great endpoint. It's also great to help amplify that message, to format your tweets not as replies. And so that means we don't start our pre-populated message with the @ symbol, and instead throw in a period ahead of it if we want to start with the elected official's handle, or we use their handle in the middle of the tweet. That means it'll show up in people's timelines, and they don't have to follow both people to see it. And so here's an example where we've targeted a bunch of people based on their committee membership or their vote history and given different messages for each. And so as an Engage user, I can come in here, I can make changes, I can tweet them individually, or I can just hit one button and tweet all at the same time without leaving the platform. And again, collecting all of the information on the people who have taken action here. Now finally, and this is the best part, is bringing together the donations on Twitter and these Twitter calls to action. And so by using the app, you can pre-populate your tweets at elected officials to include your Twitter handle with that app installed, your hashtag donate, and a suggested dollar amount. And the same process will happen. And so I'll tweet from within here, and then in my Twitter feed, in the replies, I'm going to interact with the United Way, and we're going to process those donations. It's, again, a great way for people to show officials how serious they are about an issue. It's an excellent way for people to show what good they're doing in a public way and amplify those donations to their followers, and also allow their followers to jump in and do the same thing. So really travels far outside of just this personal interaction between an advocate and an elected official. And in keeping with the theme of meeting people where they are, Anne mentioned that we see a higher rate of donors among people who take action on these advocacy messages. So you want to ask people to donate when they are feeling really good about getting involved. And what some people will do is they'll add on their confirmation page after someone has sent off their letter, say a link off and saying, please donate. Takes me to a third-party site. There are a bunch of fields to fill out. And we lose people because we're going to a different place and we're getting a different experience. We, with Engage and Ignite, have a nice little button that you can embed right on your confirmation page. The whole transaction happens in a tiny little modal that pops up, and the fields are really minimal. It's as few as 2 clicks to donate with a very small amount of information. You can see here in this example, I'm already signed in, and so it's going to be 1 click, and it has all of my information. Donation will process, and I've never left this Engage page, and so after it confirms, I can move on, take action on other things, learn about the issues that are important to me. And all of these are available for any 501c3s or C4s. If you are one or you work with one, maybe a foundation, it's a great opportunity to leverage that using your Engage or Ignite account. And so if you have one, please do reach out to your account representative to talk about getting things started. I'm going to hand it over to Anne again.
Okay, great. Thank you, Megan. And obviously anyone on the line who already has some of our CQ advocacy solutions, CQ Engage or CQ Ignite, that's kind of ready to go right now, Megan, right? You can get going. And obviously if you'd like to start using CQ Engage or CQ Ignite, we would love to talk to you, and there's some information on there that we will share as part of the presentation when we send that out. So we do have some questions here. Lindsay asked, have you found a standard for how soon you should reach out regarding Giving Tuesday, a week prior or sooner? I would say probably no more than 2 weeks prior, unless there's really nothing else going on and really no other excuse to reach out with people, to people. You know, when we start promoting these webinars, we generally do it a week and a half out. That kind of gives people enough time to mark it on their calendars without having something else comes up that gets in the way. So I would say probably 2 weeks at the outset. It kind of gives you enough time to kind of build momentum and have everything in place. So you still have a little bit of time. I think I looked, and from today it was 40 days to the 28th of November. So you've certainly got some time still to kind of get something in place for that. And there's one more question from Stephen, and it's, what's the best way for a 501c4 to answer the question about not being a charitable deduction? Is that something, Megan? I'll let Megan answer that.
Sure. So you can customize the email that is sent after people process their donation within our tool. And rather than, of course, being a tax receipt, you can explain that it is not a deduction, and also a little bit about the work that you do, and why that's not covered.
Okay, great. Well, again, thank you, everyone. We will send this along, as I said, after the presentation, and look out for the bonus material of the white paper as well. And please feel free to reach out to either of us if you have any questions. We love to hear from you. And join us again next time. Thanks a lot.